I got an email recently, and it was from somebody who had purchased a Retina 1A. And so what they said was they bought it for, pretty good price, but the shutter release won't work. And they're wondering why it won't work. And so as I thought about this, there are several reasons why. First one, of course, is that the shutter hasn't been tensioned. If you can't move that film advance, then it's because it could be because the frame counter has reached zero. And when the frame counter reaches zero, then the film advance lever locks. Another reason that the shutter release might not be working, I can't recall if this is true of a 1A. I know it's true of the B and C models in that it has this small piece of metal, and sometimes if it gets out of position, it won't allow you to, sometimes the button won't come up, or if it does come up, if it's slightly out of position, rotated in the wrong position, it won't depress correctly. But I can't remember if that's true of the 1A and 2A cameras because it's been a while since I've worked on them. So this gave me an idea to just do the Retina 1A and 2A as a video. So let's just jump into it now. With World War II now a distant memory, camera production in Europe, specifically Germany, returned in earnest. And one of the beneficiaries of that was Kodak. Kodak produced Retina models from its plant in Stuttgart. That was in the Western Zone, and thank goodness, because Germany by that time had already been divided into two zones, the Western Zone and the Eastern Zone. The Eastern Zone was controlled by the Soviet Union, while the Western Zone was controlled by the United States, and of course later went on to become West Germany. The Eastern Zone became East Germany, and those of course remained divided until 1990. Anyway, so we're going to look at two cameras today, and they're very similar in shape and in body design. This is the Kodak Retina 2A and the 1A. Production of these two models ran from 1951 to 1954, so they were in production for really just a few years. But that's true of many of the Kodak cameras. In fact, I think I'll show this list real quickly. The list of Kodak models, particularly those branded as Kodak 1, was bewildering. And if you look at this, there are, no less than 7 or 8 models or 9 models branded as Kodak Retina 1. So there's the Retina 1 Type 010, Retina 1 Type 013, Retina 1 Type 119, Retina 1 Type 126, Retina 1 Type 141, Retina 1 Type 143, Retina 1 Type 148, and finally Retina 1 Type 149. And often the variations between these many Retina 1 models is just like the number of serrations, the film advance or film rewind knobs. For the average user, they probably couldn't be able to tell you which Retina 1 model they have, and in the end, it probably doesn't really matter that much. There also were 4 Kodak 2 models. There were 2 Kodak 2A models. I never tried to collect every model of the Kodak Retina 1 for that reason. Anyway, let's get back to these cameras. These cameras are notable for both having lever wind. Also, these are favorite of collectors and users. Some felt that these were the high point of the Retina design, and because they were small and compact and really kept to the original design provided by Nagel Camera Works. If you recall, Nagel Camera Works operated independently and was purchased by Kodak in the early 1930s. Kodak was responsible for bringing the Retina cameras to market, and alongside it, the standard 35mm, what they called the daylight loading cassette. And that was important because before all film cassettes had to be preloaded in the dark with pre-cut lengths of film or lengths of film. Remember, they're actually using 35mm cinematic film. So in this case, a photographer will go in the darkroom with generally like what they called a template, which would be a piece of metal, to measure out the length of film, cut it, and then preload it into their camera, all in total darkness. So the daylight loading cartridge eliminated all that, and it rolled it into a nice compact package that could be used by existing cameras in the market, and camera makers quickly adapted to it because it was so easy to use. And that was always one of the hallmarks of Kodak film. Remember, you press the button, we do the rest. The primary difference in these two models is, well, the primary differences, let's make that plural, between these two models is the lens, and also the fact that this was a scale focus camera and this was a rangefinder camera. They appear to be built on the same body shell because if you look, the bodies themselves, from base to really the bottom of the viewfinder housing, is the same. The viewfinder housing here is slightly taller to account for the rangefinder mechanism. They both were finished with pretty much the same designs in the front. And depending on what market, they were treated a bit differently. This has a small chrome finish to the top of the lens door, while this one was painted black. On the back, they're very similar, and you can see how they both have Kodak Retina and a nice little script camera. For the most part, the back and the bottoms could be identical with both cameras, and the only change is going to be the addition of the rangefinder with this model. So with the 1A, the viewfinder is centered over the lens, where with the 2A, the viewfinder is offset, and that, of course, is to provide a reasonably wide base for the rangefinder. This one needed no parallax correction, although you did have to guess on the focus. To focus the lens, both of them used a small knob that was located at, I guess that would be roughly between the 4 and 5 o'clock position, and you just pushed up with your finger to focus the lens. This was a unit focusing design, which meant the entire lens moved either closer to or away from the film plane. Same with this one, and you can see how that works. There was a depth of field built into the scale, and depending on whether your camera was made for the US market or the European market, you either got a distance scale marked in feet or you had one marked in meters. They had identical shutters, which was was this a synchro computer? Yes, they both used the synchro computer shutter, which means that it was synchronized. It was synchronized for flash. Of course, at that time there was no electronic flash, but it still works well today. And your flash synchronization is here and also here, identical on both cameras. It's very likely that the shutters were the same. It was the use of the same shutter, as they both had this small little. This small little green tab is actually the. Come on, think of it. It's actually the self-timer lever. You adjusted your aperture down here, and so when we look at the another primary difference, which I had mentioned early on, is the lens. This uses a Schneider Xenar, which is a Tessar type, 4 elements, and I believe this is 3.5. Yes, it is a 3.5 f3.5 50 millimeter lens. This used the Schneider Xenon, which I believe, I don't know if that's a sonar design, but anyway, it's a more complicated lens. It's a more complex lens design, and this is an f2, so it's a faster lens. Actually considerably faster, almost 2 stops, right? Because you would think that 2.8 would be 1 stop and 3.5/4 would be the next stop. So this lens was 2 stops faster, and is that important? Sure. If you want to take any photos at night, the faster lens always gives you an advantage. There's nothing wrong with the 3.5, and the Xenar certainly, the Xenar, the Tessar type, certainly is always a fine choice. Your aperture adjustment lever is here, and you would change your shutter speeds by simply rotating the ring. Although there are no click stops for each of the shutter speeds, this is the type of shutter that you probably shouldn't set the indicator between speeds. I don't think it'll hurt it, but you probably shouldn't do that. As with this is an early synchro computer shutter, so if you wanted to use the top speed of 1/500th of a second, you should really set that speed before you tension the shutter, not after. The synchro computer had a full range of speeds running from 1/500th of a second down to 1 second plus B. B, of course, means that the shutter will remain open as long as you keep the shutter release depressed. This used the film advance lever. However, there are several things that you should always remember about a retina, nearly all folding retinas. One is that in order to close the lens door, the lens always needs to be set at infinity. If you try to close the lens door, these little pins simply won't depress. To close the lens door, you have pins at the top and bottom. Simply squeeze them together and close the lens door. Same with this one. Squeeze and push the lens door till it's closed. If you want, you could always press in the lens release door so it doesn't really snap shut. You can ease it into position. And to open the camera, simply press that button on the bottom. It should pop open. This one, however, I noticed needs a little bit of help. So I give it a little shake. Pull it open until it clicks into place. These had automatic frame counters, and I believe this was a countdown counter. Let's see. Let's set that to a slightly faster speed. 25, 24, 23. Yes, this is a countdown frame counter. So how this worked is you would load your film, then you would set this ring to your maximum number of frames for that particular roll. So remember, at that time, film was sold in, I believe, 20 and 36, rolls of 20 and 36 frames. So if you were going to do this for 36 frames, you would have to ease it past the one, put it on the diamond, and then you would fire off 2 blanks. 1, 2, see, and now you're at 36. However, if you had a 20-shot roll, or a 20 shot roll in your camera, then just rotate this to 25 or 20. Very simple. The thing about the Retina cameras is they had this device in here, so when you reach the end of the roll film, like this, it locked the film advance. And that did 2 things. Well, the primary thing is it let you know that you had reached the end of the roll film. And the second thing is it prevented you from forcing the advance lever and either damaging the film advance mechanism or tearing the film out of the canister. Both of those conditions are bad, so it was just a way for you to say, hey, you know what? Time to change the film. Once you would reach the end of the roll film, you would then press this button on either camera. And this used what they call knob rewind. So you could pull this away from the body slightly and you start cranking. This could take maybe a minute or so. I think a roll 20 might take 30, 40 seconds. Roll 36, maybe up to a minute. After you've done it enough times with these cameras, it's not a big deal. One thing that's interesting is the size of the eyepieces on both cameras. So with the Retina 1, you see you have a very tiny eyepiece. And with the 2A, you have a circular one, and it's slightly larger. Both are still fairly small by today's standards. So if you were to look at, let's say, a 35mm camera, that eyepiece looks really, really tiny. But in practice, you don't really notice it. It's not that big of a deal. Because the viewfinder is centered over the lens, there really is no parallax correction that occurs. Oddly enough, or interestingly enough, let's say that, as you focus the camera, the entire prism rotates a little bit more to the right, and so it does its own parallax correction. This uses a traditional viewfinder of overlapping images in which you focus until the 2 images align, then you're in focus, and then you can recompose your shot or simply take your photo, whichever you prefer. To open these cameras, it's very simple. There's a small little lever. Just simply lift that up and the back will pop open, just like that. Let's close the door for a second. This will make it somewhat easier. So both cameras are identical, particularly from the inside. If you were just to look at the inside, you really couldn't tell one from the other. So each has a pressure plate and a small roller, and the roller really just guides the film or just makes it a smoother process. Roll the pressure plate, keeps the film flat against the film rails and as flat as possible. So when you take your photo, you don't get any softness in the corners. You have a small spindle right here. And here's your take-up spool. The take-up spool has a small serrated dial at the end. This helps you start to get the film started on the take-up spool. Once it's started, close the back, push that lever down, the back will stay closed, and you fire off 2 blanks. Set your frame counter to the maximum number of exposures that you have for that particular roll, and you're ready to go. Like I said, it's a very, very simple camera to use. And really, I think they're quite attractive. These both have accessory shoes. I can't remember if you can slide a traditional flash unit into that shoe, but should be able to. Let me check. Now remember, with any flash unit you do attach to it, you're going to have to run a cable from here to the side of the shutter to that synchronization post. And in fact, this will fit. You'll see how this looks with the flash attached. It's a bit much, and I don't think I've ever shot flash with this particular camera. Actually, if you've heard me say so, I tend not to use flash at all. I think that I mentioned that these two cameras actually are a favorite of users, and really it was because of the small size. Some people felt that when they moved to the B and C models that the cameras got too large and too far away from the original design of the Kodak Retinas. I don't necessarily agree with that because I really do enjoy using both of these cameras. I did want to mention one thing. They both use coated lenses, of course. It's difficult to tell, but here's one indicator. It has a small red triangle. And the small red triangle here, and then the small red triangle here, there it is, indicates that still is a coated lens. With these two models, Kodak did something a bit different. Is they departed from multiple sources for the lenses. Prior to this, it used either a Schneider lens, a Kodak branded lens, a Zeiss Tessar, and I think one other. But beginning with these cameras, or at least with these cameras. I don't know if it started with these cameras, but with these cameras, it used only 2 types of lenses, one from Schneider and the other from Rodenstock. And that carried through both to the B and C models, as well as the fixed lens rangefinders, the interchangeable lens rangefinders, as well as the line of Retina branded single lens reflex cameras, SLRs, if you will. So if you happen to own one of these cameras, you should consider yourself lucky. I think these are very, very fine cameras, both as users and even if you're a collector. If you ever repair one of these, there is a small little piece under the frame counter that you have to be very careful. There's 2, it's a single spring with like 2 tabs on it. You have to be careful never to break that. If you ever break that, you're going to have to replace it, and I think there might be one place in the world, actually, that still has a supply of those. Otherwise, you're going to have to get a donor body, which means you buy a second camera of the same model, and now you have 2 cameras, one with a frame counter that works and one with a frame counter that doesn't work. So then what usually happens is you think, I'll get a beat-up camera, then you get a third camera. So now you have 3 cameras, and you can see how this just goes on and on. But anyway, getting too far ahead of myself. Let's check the weight of both cameras. Well, the 2A should weigh more simply because it has a lens with more lens elements, and also because it has a rangefinder assembly. So this is 1 pound, 1.5 ounces. Now the 2A. 1 pound, 4 ounces. And that pretty much, I expected that. That's not a surprise. Generally, I don't measure the cameras, but in this case, let's take a quick look at the size of these cameras, because I think that could be interesting. Okay, so the width of the camera is I guess that is roughly, what is that, 12 and a half centimeters, or about 4 and 3/4 inches, right? So I'm not going to bother measuring the other because it's the same. So from the base to at its highest point, from the base to the top deck, it's just under 3 inches. And with the 1A, it's probably what, 2 3/4, shade over 2 3/4, and this one is probably 2 7/8. So it does add a bit more distance. In fact, this is 1/2 inch. I don't know what I was looking at. And for this one, it is 3/8 of an inch. So the 2A, it only adds a 1/4 inch to the overall height, and that's almost negligible, while you do get more functionality. If I had the choice, I probably would select the 2A, unless I was looking to take a photo that took advantage of those Tessar type qualities. And that is, you sometimes get that rounded image. Both are going to be really fine for general photography. And when it comes down to it, it's more about what you see, how you see a scene, than it is solely about the lens. The lens certainly plays into it, but it should never be your final determining factor. I've used both of these cameras. I probably favored the 2A more often than the 1A, and that's mostly because I'm really poor at judging distances. I've tried really hard to get better, but sometimes I've been right on, and sometimes I've been like way off the mark. Now, you might be wondering, why does the leather on this camera look so good, or mine doesn't look so good? The reason is because I actually treat the leather in a very traditional manner, and I think what I'll do is I'll show you how I do that in a future video. It's really quite simple. There's nothing extraordinary about it, but it is a way to keep your camera looking really great, particularly if you want to either put it on display, use it, or sell it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, this foray into Kodak's Dynamic Duo, and if you have any thoughts about any other cameras you'd like for me to review, please let me know in the comments below, or drop me a note at contact@camera-talk.net. Until then, keep on taking photographs.